Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rob Steinbaum. I'm Associate Dean for Advancement here at the law school. And what my job is to meet interesting alumni. And there is no one more interesting than this gentleman, whom I met early in my tenure here the summer before last. Thomas Fortune Fay is a graduate of this school in 1965. He had graduated from Notre Dame before that. He was here 4 buildings ago. So that when he went to when he went to Rutgers Law School, it was in the red brick building that had been the YWCA and is now part of the Newark Museum down the street. Tom graduated here. He was originally from Delaware and went back to Delaware and worked in a small bank. So he did banking law, but then he went to DC. And he did everything. He is a lawyer's lawyer. He practiced personal injury, plaintiff side, personal injury law. He practiced criminal law. He just told me he tried 10 murder trials and got everyone off.
I ran in my car afterwards.
He had a general practice of trial work until a case came to him on international terrorism some, 20 years ago, 25 years ago?
Yeah, it was 1997 we filed suit.
Okay, so that's...
1996 we got an amendment through to the code. It was Public Law 104-208 that allowed suits. And we immediately filed it.
So he transformed into an anti-terrorism lawyer, and he'll be telling you about those cases, particularly one, Bank Marchese versus Peterson, that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was decided last year, and ongoing litigation against Bank Paribas. So Tom not only knows how to establish liability and get judgments against foreign actors, but he also knows how to find assets. And many times the assets are much harder than than getting the liability. He's been able to do that, and in the first case he found $2.2 billion, which this fall finally has largely been distributed to victims from whom he had obtained, or for whom he had obtained judgments. So he will tell you more, but we're very fortunate. He's come down from Washington today to speak to you. So let's play.
The number in the Supreme Court docket number is 14-770. If on your computers you just put in Supreme Court of the United States, and then it'll have docket, and they make you run over 2 or 3 more jumps, and you finally come down to where you can just hit the button, and what pops up on your screen is the opinion of the Supreme Court.
Can you give us the number again?
Yes, 14-770. And it's the first person that signed up, Debbie Peterson, versus the Islamic Republic of Iran. I remember when she signed up, she said, "We're taking on the Islamic Republic of Iran." I said, "That's it, yeah." So, well, what can you do on this? I don't know, but we're going to try. We're going to see what we can do. And we got a judgment against him. The initial judgment was for the first group of people out of this one occurrence. The occurrence was October 23rd, 1983. At Beirut, Lebanon, and it was carried out under the orders of a man by the name of Mahashtami-Pour, who was in name the Iranian ambassador to Syria, but he was actually running the sort of invasion by Hezbollah and the Iranian Guards, invasion of Lebanon, which was countered by the Israelis coming up along the coast. The United States put in a battalion, a reinforced battalion that the Marines call a Marine Amphibious Unit, MAU, 24th MAU, 1/8 Battalion of the Marine Corps. And I know from the two commanders that they were begging to be able to take high ground and defend that, rather than to be at the airport, which is at the foot of a large mountain, such that the people that didn't like them being there could sit on top of the mountain with a 60mm mortar, which is not a long distance weapon, and pop 60mm mortar shells. And the way that that was to some extent equalized was they had the USS New Jersey go and fire 16-inch shells. That didn't work too well. They blew up a group of regular Army, not regular US Army, regular Lebanese Army people. But the thing was a mix-up from beginning to end. But it was very well planned, and we ran a truck in, blew it up, blew a hole 40 feet deep that was all that was left of the building, turned the building into dust. It was reinforced concrete. The reinforcing rods bounced off the tower at the airport. It was 20,000 pounds of PET, which is a high explosive. And we were able to show that it was Iran to carry this out. Two people who were intelligence people, I mean in the employ of their governments, but had retired, came with us, and they were able to find a member of Hezbollah who had decided that this wasn't what he wanted in life. And in the middle of the night, we went in and took his deposition. One of the things you gotta remember about these things is it's best if you have good luck. And we had good luck. That night that we went in, there was a fierce snowstorm at that end of the Mediterranean, and I think we were the only plane that got in, because the only thing at the airport were building guards. They had nobody there even to look at the passport, which was fine with us because the passports may have been deficient to some extent, let's just put it that way. But a couple of nights later, we deposed this guy, and he described everything, how they took a truck that delivered things, put explosives on, got it in, so forth. We also had testimony from the head of research for Shin Bet, the Israeli National Security Service, who at that time was in charge of a joint CIA-US task force that was monitoring all the messages in and back and forth, and that the order had come to carry out the attack in the Marine barracks and on the French paratroopers. So why wasn't everybody ready for this? Because that intercept did not get to the Navy Department until 2 days after the attack. It was intercepted in the late September. At that time, there were like about 4 layers of people that it went through, and the idea on these things, if you don't make out well, if you create another layer of bureaucracy, and in my opinion, in the history of the human race, that's never worked. If you have something that doesn't work, creating another layer of bureaucracy just makes it even more certain that you're not going to be successful the next time around. That's one little lesson. At any rate, we got a $2 billion, I think it was 656 million, and some other numbers judgment went about enforcing it. I had given a subpoena to the department, this Treasury Department, Office of Foreign Assets Control, and they responded to it. And at first I thought that maybe my email had been picked up by some kids, because I got this message back that said that I'd be getting information back at 11 o'clock that night. This is in the middle of the summer from the Justice Department. And I thought, yeah, this sounds to me like a couple of high school kids out in Bethesda that intercepted the message and they're pulling my leg, and at 11 o'clock I'm going to get something that says, gotcha, gotcha. No, it was the stuff, and it went down, I think there were 24 different items listed. All of them were internationally registered bonds with the registration numbers and so forth. And with that was a statement from OFAC that these had been intercepted, and that the named owner of it, namely an outfit that was organized under the laws of Luxembourg, was not the actual owner, that the actual owner was the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we got an attachment issued the next day. We had some war luck there, because one of the two intelligence officers that was a good friend of mine, still is a good friend of mine, ran into the head of the CIA that afternoon, purely a chance occurrence, and said, I want to thank you for what you must have done to get us this information. He said, well, I gotta say I don't know what you're talking about. But he said, let me make a call for a minute. So he made a call, and he said, I would advise you to get a writ issued right away. Well, the place had already closed up. But I called the lady who had sent the stuff over to us. It was a lower ranking person in the Justice Department, and said, we need to get this thing served by a U.S. Marshal right away. She said she had no control over it. And I took a little chance, because I was pretty certain, from knowing the way the government worked to some extent, from my friend, that this had to be approved by the Attorney General. And I said, I know you don't, but the Attorney General does. Call the Justice Department right away, get a hold of the Attorney General, and ask him to authorize having the U.S. Marshal serve this right away. And call me back, no matter what the time is. 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a call, and she said, Deputy U.S. Marshal will be picking up the process at 6 a.m. And they served it right away, and we got the thing done. What I was afraid was it'd either move out of the country, that was the biggest fear, or some other outfit would take control. Well, at any rate, we had that attached. They had never entered an appearance in the case itself, but now they entered an appearance fighting to try and keep us from collecting on the thing. We won in the district court. It went up to the Court of Appeals. We won in the Court of Appeals, and they filed a petition for certiorari. We felt that would probably be rejected. It was not. It was granted, and in that is a little bit that's worth learning about how the Supreme Court operates. Petitions for cert are all considered at a meeting of the justices. And this is not a thing that each justice is equal. No. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is an unequal among equals. And we can be pretty sure from the oral argument, wanted this thing to be granted. He wanted it to be granted because in the course of the thing, after we had seized the items, we were successful in getting through an amendment to the banking code, which provided for this, that it would be, it could be attached to sort of glue it in to the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act and the act having to do with both the insurance, buildings, so forth and so on. At any rate, we got it put in, and in the Supreme Court, this became really the only issue. And the issue then became really separation of powers. And the Chief Justice was the man who was against us. He said, this is what he said in open court. I'm not getting any information from any of the justices on the side or anything, although one of them actually taught me here, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I gotta say all good things about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I've had her in two cases. One when she was a judge on the United States Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia, where we were attacking a standard that had been followed for years of claims-minded, giving claims-minded instructions, that in a personal injury case, if the person had any prior claims, you could get a claims-minded instruction that the jury could consider that this person was not really hurt, but essentially was only claims-minded. We took that up. My argument that she liked and wrote a good opinion on was that if this is correct, then we have to conclude that any family where you get 3 people who died because of gun violence, especially 3 people who were well off, that this must be a fraud. There could only be one. So therefore, we have to conclude that the deaths of John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy were both frauds. They were just acting, and they're someplace out there running around. If this is based on she liked that, and which is correct. Statistics don't mean that it's going to happen every single time. It doesn't mean that you can't have, 3 people come down with some disease that has no connection for any one of the 3 to the other one in the same family. That's pretty much what they call luck. And she wrote a great opinion tossing out the claims-minded instruction. Well, in this case, she was very, very much on our side. And one of the things that had happened was that there were about 13 other cases, much smaller than ours, that had judgments against Iran because of injury, death, in terrorist attacks. They had gotten judgments and they were attempting to enforce them. We managed to get this one big pot of money, and we had a certain weakness in our thing, and that is that the one guy that we had working on it failed to do what he should have done, and did not file, which of course across in New York is known as it's a new turnover action, and therefore some of these outfits were entitled to priority before us. I went over 2 years and met with all of them and said, if we get this into a fight back and forth, a bunch of lawyers fighting about money and pointing fingers at everybody else, what we're likely to end up with is nobody's going to get anything. And especially it's going to hurt people using this statute in the future to stop terrorism. And it took 2 years, but they finally all agreed. We had all of them in on it. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was asking questions on the oral argument, after the chief judge had said, well, this is just one case. This is just somebody trying to use the Congress to dictate the result in a case. And that's a violation of the separation of powers. She said, no, it isn't. This isn't one case. This is 14 cases, or 16, whatever the number was, in the teens anyway. We're at 16 cases. They're all together on this. This covers all the people that had gotten judgments at that time. They're all going to share in this, and that was a killer. And for the argument of the Chief Justice, it made him extremely unhappy. I mean, he's normally a kind of sober, even he was. I think they should have called his wife and said, make something he likes tonight, because otherwise you're in big trouble. At any rate, in the oral argument, we did have, in addition to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we had two other champions. One of them, Mr. Justice Breyer, who continually drilled these guys. And so what's wrong with that? They found assets. They got a bill through Congress that the asset was viable as far as being attached. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what people should do. And Scalia really laid on them. And I felt strongly that those three justices, Scalia, Breyer, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, are probably the three most powerful in the sense of convincing people. And so I thought that the oral argument went very well. No, I did not do the oral argument. You will see that in the opinion. I wanted to get somebody that did this better than anybody else in the country, and that person was Ted Olson. Ted Olson too had a personal interest in this. When they first moved for the writ, I called up a friend of mine who called him, and I called over to him then, and I said, I'd like to talk to you about coming in with us on this, and when can we talk? He said, come on over right now. And when I got in through the door, we'd never met. I mean, even to shake hands, I'd seen him at bar things and things, and I'd never met. Before I could say anything, he said, I want your case. And why did he want the case? He wanted the case because his wife was one of the people killed at the Pentagon on 9/11. The plane crashed into the Pentagon, and to make it sort of more torturous, if there could be anything to make it more torturous, she was calling him on the cell phone as the plane was coming into where it crashed into the building. And I'd have to say that there didn't have to be any kind of discussion about what the compensation would be or whatever. And you can take a lesson from it too, in as far as preparation. He spent over a month doing nothing but this case, he and Matt McGill, his assistant. Then they had two moot courts. Moot courts being that they got lawyers up there playing the part of justices, and instead of just having a 1 hour oral argument, each one of these things went on for 3 hours, two of them, where they bombed them with every possible question, every kind of question. And his performance was absolutely terrific. So what would be the cause of any problem after that? Well, I've been promising my wife to take her down to Florida, where we have a condominium. So I drove her down to Florida, and then talked her into going over to the racetrack for lunch. And the phone rang. It was my daughter, and all she said was, Scalia dropped dead. I said, Karen, that's not funny. She said, it's not funny for him either, he's dead. So the thing that bothered me about it is that that this isn't, the way that the Supreme Court operates is it isn't a deal where they have an oral argument and everybody then checks number 1 box or number 2 box or something, and that's the way they do it. They have a meeting, and people can be persuasive. And Scalia particularly is very persuasive, and he was the person on the Republican side, if you will, of the justices that was really in our camp. And what I was afraid of was, with him gone, that all of our support from that side might slide away and we'd be left short. Well, we weren't. The only person who sided with him, in fact, was not another Republican justice, but Justice Sotomayor, who concurred but did not write a concurring opinion, really stating why she was. And incidentally, I was interviewed by Forbes magazine, and one of the things they came out with was, don't you think that what Chief Justice Roberts said, that was just kind of dopey and not to the point? And I said, no, I don't think that way at all. I said, the first reason I don't think that way is because separation of powers is an important constitutional principle. Now, my view on whether or not this was a violation differed from his. Am I happy that 6 members of the court agreed with me instead of with him? Sure I am. But that doesn't mean that what he was saying was foolish or was off the beam or whatever. And then I said the other thing is, we wouldn't have even been here if it weren't for a vote in the Scipio Polio case, in which the United States Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit was thinking about tossing out the whole idea of people being able to sue sovereign nations. And the Chief Justice at that time, a judge of the Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit, and the man who unfortunately probably will not become a justice, but was nominated by Obama, President Obama, for the job, were in favor of us. We won that case. I say we won. We didn't argue it. They had picked on a lesser case and tried to use it to get rid of these cases. But we were very happy about it. The other people on the court didn't change what apparently was their view from the beginning, and therefore everything was turned over by order of the court. And now we're in the process of distributing that, and that's going pretty well. I wanted to bring you up to date on the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. Of course, there's been an amendment with regard to the Saudis, and quite frankly, the Saudis for a long time have been able to act as an ally of the United States, while at the same time, the same royal family behind the scenes has done a lot to subsidize terrorist groups. They've had a free place to hide when they wanted to do it. Now, I'm not sure that this statute that went through is really going to do all of that. I think it should have been spelled out clear, and one of the things I thought should have happened was put him on the terrorist list, but that has to be done by the administration, and the President Obama would not do that. And that's the reason for the thing. The vote on that, incidentally, on the veto override in the Senate was 97 votes to override, only 1 vote against, and 2 abstaining. It was the most, let's say, the greatest margin that you've ever had on an override of a veto. And I think a lot of this goes to the sort of war going on between those who are trying to do something about terrorism and the State Department that really believes that you can go negotiate the thing and Iran will agree to do things. I do think that these cases have helped to push them back off the board. The terrorist events of recent in the United States have been things that probably were individual things. They couldn't, even with a lot of surveillance by the FBI, there was nothing that came up that indicated that there was, this was planned by Iran or any of the other terrorist countries. But I think we're going to see what happens with Saudi Arabia. I would think if I had a case right now that was going against them since they this act has been taken so that you can do, I think what I'm trying to do is fit it within the context of the Anti-Terrorism Act. The reason for that is that the Anti-Terrorism Act provides for triple compensatory damages plus attorney's fees plus costs. So that, for instance, in the case that we have against the Sudan and Iran, where we have a $1 billion judgment that we're in the process of enforcing, this is not part of the Marines. If we have filed under the Anti-Terrorism Act now, after getting a $1 billion judgment under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, and we are asking for triple damages plus attorney's fees plus the costs. The outcome of that really depends upon a case which is up in the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, involving the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, ATA, involving the outfits that are, let's say, getting pointed at. We feel pretty good about winning it. We had an oral argument and their motion to set aside the $1 billion in judgments. That did not go over well with the judge. He held against. They filed an appeal. We had the oral argument back about 3 weeks ago, and I felt that we'd probably win it 2-1 just from the reaction of the judges, which is no sure shot by any means. I think that whatever the administration in power does, it's got to put a brake on stuff like the Saudis assisting in any kind of terrorism. They got to be on one side or the other. It isn't a deal where they can play both sides. I do also think that all of these cases that have been brought, it's probably about I don't know, $25 billion altogether or more. I think that has pushed Iran to the brink. Incidentally, the doings of Iran are monitored and by U.S. intelligence. I had a call from the FBI several years ago that said that my name was mentioned on the floor of the Iranian parliament, and that they said that I was a legal terrorist. So I said, were they speaking in English? He said, no. I said, you think you could get them to speak in English and record it for me? And I don't think they could do that. So that's the way that's the way that goes, and it's really trying these cases. Incidentally, we had a meeting down at Camp Lejeune of a lot of the people that we represent on the anniversary, October 23rd, the anniversary of the attack on the Marine barracks. And through all of this, from when we first filed in September of 2001 to the present, no one's gotten off the boat. We haven't had anybody get off the boat. What we did in terms of getting legislation through, I've had a couple people write up things that would make it sound as if myself and the other attorneys must be geniuses in handling Congress. That isn't so. But I tell you what did do it for handling Congress, and then if you ever get in a situation where you're asked to lobby something, you have the kind of advantages we had in this, you should take them, and that is your clients. These clients are willing all over the world, some of them flew in from outside the United States, to come and lobby for up on the Hill. I'll never forget a meeting I had with one of the senators from North Carolina. She got called in the middle of it to go on over for a thing, but the person that was their representative was there and listening, and they asked one person, well, what's your part in this? And he said, I don't remember what happened when the bomb went off. He said, I woke up in a body bag and I started thrashing around, and fortunately somebody saw it and opened the body bag and let me out. And so this particular U.S. Senator from North Carolina had assigned a lady that was working on a temporary furlough from a regular employer over at the Pentagon, and her regular employer was the United States Marine Corps. She's an intelligence officer in the Marine Corps, and we got it showed up too in what we did in the appeal. There were 9 briefs filed in support of us. There was one brief filed on behalf of the United States House of Representatives with no dissents. Believe it or not, no dissents. There was another one. There were 2 of them filed by the Senate. One was filed on behalf of all the members of the Senate. The other one was a separate brief that was filed by Sheldon Whitehouse and Cruz, the senator from Texas. That's as wide a spread of ideologies as you can get. You'd have to pick somebody from the Kremlin and some surviving Nazi to get further apart. It's the only way, as well as senator from Delaware. What's the name? I told you that. Yeah. And the other one was the Republican senator from South Carolina. So we got all of that support. I think because the people looking at it were interested in the thing, but also they felt a connection with it. I mean, I think everybody felt a connection with these Marines. That's what you have to do in trying a case. There was a young lady was working a couple years ago in my office, and we had a case where our client, who unfortunately suffered injuries in which he died, but he was walking into a restaurant and there was a rug sticking out from underneath a little thing where you could sit down. He tripped over it and fell. And She said, well, of course, the law is that you have a right to assume that the place you're going into is safe. And I said, yeah, but if you say that, even if they put it in the instructions, which you probably will, especially if they don't give it in writing, that isn't going to do that. I said, here's the way I would do it. I said, you come on in and when they get in the box, when you're going to make your opening statement, you walk up the aisle between the seats on either side, over to them, and you say, I know that you folks have the ability to understand and know what happened exactly in this case. And I know that because as you walked in, you trusted that the Prince George's County, Maryland, has a solid floor in here, so you go plunging through the floor. You understood, you assumed that Prince George's County, Maryland didn't have any bricks falling off the roof or anything. You assumed, in other words, that this was made safe by the people that owned it, just as they're required to do. That's all this case is about. It's about somebody who didn't make it safe. And then you can describe the thing. But if you just put it in sort of dry terms, most people, it just goes over their head. You have to find ways in trying a case that that doesn't happen. And I had a case years ago with a guy with essentially very little and practically nothing in personal injuries that a guy asked me to take because the statute was about to run. He hadn't filed, and this guy had been tackled, handcuffed, arrested by the policeman. The assistant U.S. attorney, when it got over to court, just dismissed the thing. There was no basis for it and everything. And but what we did was we took it on the basis that this isn't a personal injury case. This is a case that has to do with freedom. This is a case that has to do with your rights as a citizen. And you have a right not to be arrested falsely. You have a right to go where you want as long as you're not obstructing anyone else and so forth. That's what the right is. It's freedom. It's a constitutional right. And I got a judgment in that of $50,000 for compensatory damages and $50,000 for punitive damages. I did have to go to the Court of Appeals. The judge threw it out, and I took it up on appeal, and the Court of Appeals reversed it with instructions to re-enter the judgment. And my client collected the money, took it all out and enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles, and now he's a computer expert, probably making more than I am, or most of you will make doing most work. Okay, well, I wanted to bring to your attention something else. Has anybody here seen that movie, Cousin Vinny? Okay. There's a great article written on that by Judge Joseph F. Anderson, Jr., and how the things in there are just learning for how you go about influence a jury or a judge. In this case, it was a jury or a judge. You know, there's a lot of, when I was in law school, a lot of the professors would say, well, you don't do the same thing in front of a judge that you do with the jury. And, hey, I got news for you. The judge got up this morning and he put on his jockey shorts the same way everybody else did. And you don't think that judges don't get affected emotionally by this stuff. They do. They do. It's a huge part of the thing. Play it as a human, see a human being there. Yeah, he's a judge, but play it as a human being. At any rate, I think I've run enough of these so that there's one for each person. Here, let me pass these things around. A couple of things in here. You know, the way, you can never quit on a thing, and one of the fines he has in here is that good lawyers are not quitters. I wouldn't ever get in a situation where you really think that if you feel you have some way to get this thing through and to help your client, you say, nah, this is too much work. You find that things that are a lot of work, usually when you win it, you feel good. And in fact, even if you lose it a lot of times, you feel like you did something to really help and make things better. When I say work, I mean you've got to be thorough. Years ago, I represented a guy in a case. He was on his way to work, and a pickup truck crashed into the back end of him going up the expressway over in Virginia, and his car was just clobbered, just crushed up. He called his wife, who called me. I went over to see him in the hospital, and then there was a guy working for me then, and I called up the policeman who was on the scene, found out where they towed the wreckage, and we drove over to the place right away, and thank God the wreckage was still there. And I told the guy that I was there to collect the wreckage. How much do you, what's the towing charge to here, and how much would it cost to tow it over to my house? Fine, you got the dough right here. Okay, hook it up and follow me. And took it over to my house. I didn't know what we might find or not find, but I knew that if the wreckage was there, what a lot of people don't realize is when an automobile company finds out there was some type of an accident in which one of their vehicles was involved, just as a safety precaution, they'll go buy the wreckage and destroy it. So that if it's due to some defect in the vehicle, you're not going to be able to make a case out of it. Well, I found a guy who had been an expert in taking apart vehicles for evidence in cases with the FBI for 35 years, hired him on, and we spent a couple of days carefully taking every single little piece off the back end of the vehicle. They had it parked in the carport at the house I was living in at the time. So you might imagine this went over big time with my wife. She really enjoyed that. Wrecked car in the carport. But at any rate, what we found in there was the end of a bulb, just what you would push in, that was still there. And then there were some little pieces sticking up, which were the things that light up. And under a microscope, with this guy who was my expert, you could see pieces of glass that were fused on to those things that light up inside the bulb. Now, if the bulb hadn't been on, as was claimed by the driver of the other car, those things wouldn't have melted on it because the little things sticking up to conduct the electricity and give light wouldn't have been hot enough to melt it, wouldn't have been hot at all. And with that kind of evidence, we were successful in getting a big settlement on the thing. And but it's you're not going to hit it every single time, but you're getting employed to do everything you possibly can, legally, of course, and that's what you should do. So. Well, let me open it up. You have some questions about the terrorism stuff or about anything else?
Thomas,
Yes, sir.
Can you remind us, so these terrorist attacks took place when exactly? In 1983, right?
1983.
So it took more than 30 years for the... how many people were killed?
241 killed.
And so with so the
That was
families...
just the Americans. There were about 115 or something like that killed. French paratroopers were killed.
Yeah. And so you're representing the families of the people being killed
Yes.
in the US and in France too?
No, just this.
The US.
Well, in the US, we're not right now. In France, we have a suit brought in the United States against PNB Paribas because the Sudan was where this thing was ginned up. We managed to locate the guy who was Osama bin Laden's pilot, and he sort of defected when he overshot the runway at an airport, and he went immediately to the operations building and said, "Give me a ticket." They said, "For where?" He said, "Any place out of here." and he got away.
So you're representing the American families.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you got $2 billion.
Yeah.
And so now you are distributing the money to these families.
Yes. Yeah.
And so more than 30 years, and you have been on the case since the 1990s?
We picked up this case in 2001, a couple days after 9/11. We filed suit.
And why
picked it
this,
up in 2000.
and why this gap between 83 and 2000? What happened in...
Well, we couldn't have filed before 96 because we didn't. The statute hadn't gone through that allowed suits of this sort. They'd be able to defend it on sovereign immunity, and we wouldn't have been able to do anything for the folks. In 1996, with the Flatow Amendment, for the first time Americans could bring suit against any country that was on the terrorist list, and if they were injured or killed in a terrorist attack.
And this amendment, how did it come about in 1996? I mean, that was an outgrowth of what had happened in the 90s?
Well, what happened was a guy called me up that was not a trial lawyer and asked me if I'd have lunch with him, and I said yeah. And we went and had lunch, and he asked me whether it would be possible to get through a statute which would allow this and what should go in it. And so we went to work, and one of the things we came up with was the people actually killed in the terrorist event are really not the target as such. The target is the country they're from. What they're seeking to do is kill innocent people in order to intimidate the country that they oppose, whether it's the United States, France, or whatever the country is. That's what they're doing. And of course, this is most effective if this really is seen by their relatives. If their relatives are upset, this will have the maximum effect. So I put in it a provision for solation. In other words, for injuries, not because of physical injuries on the scene, or maybe because of them, but not for that, because the relatives probably wouldn't have been there, but for people that were within 1 degree of kindred of the person injured or killed, and they can file too. And that has resulted actually in more money being awarded than to the person that's actually suffers the physical injuries.
So since you started working on the case, it has been more or less 15 years.
Yeah.
So you had to be very, very patient.
Yes. Patience is something you gotta have in this business. Yeah.
And what do you think will happen with the Saudi Arabia situation?
I think I got problems with the statute in that that statute and the one that was passed before, even though we made application, you have a judgment against Sudan and against Iran because of the attacks on the U.S. embassies there. And we filed under the statute that went through that's going to pay them some money for the Tanzanians and for the Americans. It's not going to be a lot of money, but I think there are problems with the statute. I really do. I think they're going to have trouble funding that. And also, I don't like the idea that the U.S. government is going to pay some of this. The first case we actually collected on was the Flatow case. Flatow, Eisenfeld, Duker, and Jenko were all sort of together. The first one we collected on was the Flatow case.
Tell them what the students probably don't know about Flatow.
Lisa Flatow was a student up at Brandeis University. She was from East Orange, New Jersey, and she was spending a semester in Israel under a program that Brandeis has. And there was a settlement in the Gaza Strip, which was then occupied by Israel, that was a sort of resort. And she was on a bus going in there, and a suicide bomber ran a small truck in the side of the bus. It blew up, and she probably leaned over trying to avoid it, but a bolt about the size, I guess about a quarter inch, half-inch bolt, it's like a standard bolt or nut, came up and hit her behind the ear and went into the brain, and she died a couple of days later. Her father was disappointed, but that the U.S. government didn't do anything, even though it was pretty clear that that Iran had a part in this. They were subsidizing an outfit called the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and so he's the one that originated the idea we should do something here so that individuals can bring suit against the government that does this. And so that's what we did in that first statute. The country has to be on the terrorist list, and Iran was already. And from there, we can. The U.S. courts have jurisdiction in a U.S. court. That actually includes state courts, although I don't believe that there are any state courts where anyone's filed it. Most of them are filed in Washington, D.C. Some of them have been filed up here in U.S. District Court for the Northern District of New Jersey or the Southern District of New York.
Tom, you've also represented non-Americans in these kind of cases.
Yes.
How?
Well, in the amendment that went through in 2008, I wrote everything in there except the thing at the end with some back and forth about money being paid out of Syria or something. I didn't write that, the last couple of lines, but the rest of it I wrote. And we amended it so that the people covered, and this is no matter when the thing happened, would be American nationals, and I'll define that in a minute, or members of the armed forces of the United States who were injured or killed in a terrorist event and their families, or persons employed by the United States government who were injured or killed and their families. Now, in the case of the Tanzanians, they were all, one person was actually on the grounds committee, sort of taking care of the grounds there at the embassy, but the others were all the security people who heroically did not allow that truck to get up next to the embassy. If they had, it probably would have killed almost everybody in the embassy. There were Americans injured in the attack at Dar es Salaam, but nobody was killed. No American was killed. 9 of them died in the attack.
And why are you skeptical about the Saudi situation? You don't think that it's going to be the basis for
I don't know.
going forward?
Yeah, the way that they define things in there, I'm just afraid that the Supreme Court's going to say that, well, this isn't definite enough on whether or not the Saudi government has to pay, or that it might, if somebody says, okay, you have to sue the Saudi government, you can't go sue the Saudi royal family. It might be tough here to be able to enforce against items owned by the Saudi government. But the Saudi royal family, for instance, probably last time I looked, they had control of Citibank.
Mm-hmm.
So they have plenty of money here that can be levied on. So I think it would have been better to make it more definite on what you can levy on and so forth.
By focusing on the Saudi government
Yeah,
rather than the Saudi family.
yeah. So, yes, do you have another question?
I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, yeah.
But it's more like, it's not a low question. So you mentioned that your assessment of Saudi Arabia is that we are playing, both an ally of the US, but also, so how do you explain this kind of double?
Well, they're in a tough situation. They are. There's no doubt about that. I mean, before Iran came along with radical Islam, they had considerable radical Islam right in Saudi Arabia, which from time to time was doing some pretty horrible things to their own people, and they're walking the tightrope to some extent. But they've got to not give harbor to these folks that are planning or doing things to Americans.
And you said that what was essential for you to be able to win the case against Iran was that there was some evidence.
Yes.
Do you feel that it would be difficult, more difficult than it was the case for Iran, to discover the evidence, the context of which it would be possible to show that Saudi Arabia has a responsibility?
Can't tell and you go see. And I think it'd probably be easier because there is some travel in and out of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
We in the course of these things come up with some amazing things. One of the things is that you realize real quickly how counterproductive the CIA was with the running the torture places and this kind of junk. The fact of the matter is, I've gone and interviewed some of these people, and ones that are out in the big time lockup out in Colorado, and they don't hold back. They talk. They're proud of what they've done, and they don't expect to ever live on the outside. Although we'd hope to break out, but that's never going to happen. You don't need to do things like that. And what you're probably getting when you torture somebody is the guy's going to identify anybody, the next door neighbor, or the cop up at the corner or something. That just isn't the way to do things. And they had, in the case of the West African or East African embassies, they had one guy who'd been turned around by an FBI agent and had gotten all kinds of information, and the CIA then with the grabbing people and they disappear into the hinterland someplace, and they're giving them water baths and all kinds of junk. It just isn't productive.
And so far nobody has come to you in connection with Saudi Arabia. Nobody has come to you and said, well, can you help me on this?
Nobody has yet, but they're not, they haven't been on the they're really not on the terrorist list now. And that's, I don't know how the courts are going to interpret this vis-a-vis the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. They're going to say, wait a minute, why aren't they on here as a country that's supporting terrorism? I don't know where they're going to go with this. The court might go in any direction. I don't know.
And from a legal and political point of view, what is the signification of the significance, of this case that you won? I mean, you have been working on this for 15 years.
So,
What
yeah.
is the future of this case, if you would, in terms of legal developments and
Well, to have a future, you have to have an administration that, to some extent, somebody in there is willing to cooperate with you.
Mhm.
And we've always had that. They haven't been people that are much, let's say, much loved by the leadership in the administration. Let me give you an example.
So it's not, it's on your own you can succeed in doing this. The case itself is not strong enough. So unless you have some help.
You got to put in a lot of time finding the stuff and being able to use it. And a lot of this, we've been opposed by the State Department, and frankly, we were opposed by the Obama administration, the Bush administration too. Because they feel it's an interference with the foreign relations of the United States, which they contend are the sole province of the executive branch.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time they made that argument was in an oral argument in court, and the Assistant Attorney General got up and said, Your Honor, we're here because this action is intruding into the area reserved for the executive, the foreign relations of the United States. I said, Your Honor, let me just make one point. I'll be sending over a copy of the Constitution to the Assistant Attorney General tomorrow morning. He's going to be shocked to find out that the Congress and the Congress alone can declare war. He's going to be even more surprised when he finds out the Congress and the Congress alone can set up tariffs. And even more surprised when he finds out that even equipping the armed forces, that's all up to these idiots in Congress too.
Mm-hmm.
My God. So the judge was laughing at that point. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I wanted to ask too, can an admonition of guilt come from Saudi Arabia, or would you expect purely maybe down the line a financial settlement without any admonition of guilt? How will that be handled if you're working through the Saudi government on this issue? What would be your long-term expectation of an outcome for this?
Well, when they say without admonition of guilt, that they want some kind of a declaration. All the countries I've dealt with, I negotiated out an agreement with Libya over the attack at the La Belle discotheque outside Berlin, and they came out with, well, it's got to be something, we might pay some money, but it's got to be on the basis that there's no admission of guilt in this.
Yeah.
I said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't have to, and so forth. The State Department then later on had a group of them come over and talk to us, and they gave us this thing that they wanted a number of things, including an apology from the United States for bombing Libya after Libya blew up the La Belle discotheque. They wanted us to obtain licenses for them so they could buy heavy weapons, anti-tank guns, artillery guns, tanks, and so forth, and ship them to Libya. They wanted an official apology from all the people that we had and so forth. And as they had a State Department person was there, and when we said no, we don't have the power to do that. We wouldn't do it even if we did. And she objected, and I said, well, actually, I wanted to put it a different way. I wanted to say, not only will we not do that, but we felt that President Reagan didn't act properly in this case, and that what he should have done was called in the head of the Air Force and said, "You missed the bastard, now go back and get him." And they were, oh man, they were absolutely rolling on the floor. They were so mad about that. But you know, this, it was undoubtedly that country which carried out the attack, which resulted in Pan Am 103 and crashing in Scotland. And you can't let people run you that way. And the other thing is that every time we go into something, we should go in thinking, look, we want to be ready for whatever happens here, and we're not going to just put in a group that doesn't have enough people, enough weapons, enough anything to get the job done just as a demonstration. This isn't a demonstration. This isn't grade school. This is for real.
Yeah.
And we're going to put in a group that has the people, the resources to get it done. And if they are attacked by somebody, we can resist the thing. Too much of that, it does have some funny aftersides. You probably, a number of you read about the death of Joe Biden's son. My family has been friends of the Biden family for many years. My brother and Joe Biden were the two halfbacks on an undefeated football team in high school. And they went all the way through high school together, went to the University of Delaware together, and then Joe went up to Syracuse to law school, and Mike went to Temple dental school. But we stayed in touch all these years. In fact, I held a fundraiser for Bo down here a couple of years before he passed away. And I do think that Joe would have made I think more people would have voted for him than voted for Hillary, let's put it that way. I'm not throwing any bricks at Hillary. Look, she should get the Congressional Medal of Honor for staying with Bill all these years. If I were Bill, I would have called up every gun shop in Arkansas and said, if he comes in and asks for a gun, phone me right away.
Do you think that the Trump administration will be helpful for the kind of issues, the police issues on which you're working?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, this guy is a bull thrower, let's face it, and he's whether he does anything along those lines or not. You know, he used all this, I would go on in and all of this kind of stuff and yada yada yada. That doesn't mean anything. It's doing it when the time comes, if it does come. And the problem with that is, if we have some kind of a crisis, say they take over Yemen or something like that, and we want to do something to stop it. If we don't do it, it's going to be like what happened with regard to the Crimea, when the Soviets, and it's a slip of the tongue, the Russians took over the Crimea. We had guaranteed the territorial integrity of the Ukraine in return for them giving up nuclear weapons. And the nuclear weapons are gone. These guys roll into the Crimea, and we didn't do a damn thing. There was that stuff has, you know, it depends on whether people believe you. When the Cold War ended, there was some really interesting stuff that was open to Western historians in Russia. One of them was a whole series of notations about a conference held with Zhukov and Stalin in 1947. And Zhukov had been ordered by Stalin to withdraw the Red Army from northern Greece. And in the thing, indicates that Zhukov asked Stalin why he was doing this. And Stalin, without hesitating, said, because President Truman has the atomic bomb and he'll use it, period. There are a lot of things bad about using the atomic bomb, but one thing that wasn't bad was no one had any doubt as to what Harry Truman might do if it came down to needing to do this to keep us going. And Truman had the ability to make decisions like that. I don't, it's a different thing working in the private world, the world of industry and sales and all that stuff. That's what Donald has done. He hasn't done this kind of stuff. He hasn't done the kind of stuff where, I was a student here, not in this building, obviously, when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I remember that thing, and because that day that Kennedy was going to speak on the TV, there were all these reports on the radio when we were driving into school that they closed off all roads leading into Florida, and that they were moving several infantry divisions into Florida, and what the hell is going on now? And then when he came on that night, when I think he came on about 8 o'clock, and we were studying in the law library and went over to a little saloon that I think now is still there but under an Irish name. I'm not opposed to that at all. But at any rate, we went over there, and one of the things that caught everyone's attention right away is when he came to the describing the Monroe Doctrine and its effect. And he said, as a result of that doctrine, any attack on any nation in the Western Hemisphere will be treated as an attack upon the United States and will elicit full, immediate nuclear reaction. Guy next to me that I didn't know was a student, he was holding a beer, and all he said was, "Holy shit." That's about the way everyone felt, I can guarantee. The next day, this is a funny but interesting transfer. There was one older guy in our class, Gene Lewis, and the next day we were in class, and it was kind of warm, and windows were up and doors open, and a truck blew a tire or something down the intersection. All of us but Gene went under the desks. Gene was sitting there laughing like crazy. So we got up and said, "Gene, why in the hell were you laughing?" He said, "Come on, I'll buy you guys a cup of coffee, and I'll tell you." He said, "I never said anything about it because I don't even talk about it at all, but during World War II," he said, I was a pilot in the Army Air Corps. He said, we flew B-24s, and my plane was assigned to photo reconnaissance in various places in the Pacific Theater. He said, "I'll never forget our last photo reconnaissance." He said, "We were told to follow this particular route." He said, in those days, they didn't have all the stuff for finding where you were like every car has now. He said, instead you had to, if you were coming over Newark, you had to recognize the insurance building or something, or you weren't over Newark. That's the way they did it. At any rate, he said we were given these headings, and that's what they call them, and you went over this thing where you should see a pier like this or something. He said we everything we did just according to what the guy who was a navigator said, and he said then after we went over the last heading, the instruction was to descend to 1,000 feet above the ground and turn on the picture takers and take pictures. He said all of us groaned when they said that, because 1,000 feet above ground was, you were just a target for any aircraft. He said they could easily shoot you down at that. So he said we came over the last marker over some hills, dropped down and turned on all the things. And I said to the navigator, "You screwed up. There's nothing here." He said, "No, we hit every single marker." And he said, there's nothing here, look, and he said, everything just looked flat. So he said, I took it down to 500 feet above ground, and he said, there was nothing there. He said there was like bricks and things like that, and stuff like something that damaged it. He said, we didn't even see a single body, not one single body. And he said, he took all that home. He took the first pictures of Hiroshima. And he said, the reason I was laughing was, that bomb dropped on Hiroshima was a toy compared to what they have now. And it is. The last thermonuclear test in the United States made out in the Pacific was, I think, 75 kiloton. It was bigger than what they thought. My father worked on that project, the hydrogen bomb project, the pond building plant for them down at Savannah River, Georgia. So, yeah. I should say South Carolina, it's on the Savannah River, but yeah.
Well, I think we can thank him.
It's nice coming and speaking with all of you, and look, I had a meeting a couple of years ago with Elizabeth Warren when she was first running for the Senate, and I had found out that she went here to Rutgers Law School too, and I said, I don't know why you went to Rutgers, but I said, the biggest thing in my mind with 3 kids in the family was it cost $500 a year for tuition then, and that's what I could afford. And she said, that's for me too.
It's a bit more expensive now.
Well, I can't tell you how low prices were compared to now. You could get a roast beef sandwich, turkey sandwich, anything at a little deli, which was around the corner then, for 60 cents, and they throw in a drink with it. I got a drink of booze now.
Good times.
Good. Well,
Thanks.
we'll leave you. They have more class.